Hello friendos! This is going to be a little bit of a different type of video in that I want to try explicating some facets of reading and understanding social science research. I have seen this crop up a bit more frequently in the skeptic community, in that I see there are certain people who don't really appear to have a general understanding of certain aspects of social science research or how to read statistics in general, and hey, that's okay. There's no reason you should understand how to do that as a normal person. Honestly, that's why I'm doing this, is because you should not be held to that standard. Honestly, it's a problem with journalism, because as you will see, many of these studies get reported on by, quote, journalists, and the journalists don't understand how to read the studies either. As such, what they do is they totally just gloss over the data and they go right to the discussion section, and then they kind of make sweeping generalizations about what the discussion says. That is faulty, and that's not good research. What I want to do here, and what I've wanted to do since the beginning, since when I started my channel, is to give people an out. I honestly find it disgusting how much college costs, how much a single college course costs. And as such, hey, you know what guys, I've got some high-level secret ivory tower information that I can disseminate, and I can disseminate it for free. Honestly, I will not be the only person, I certainly am not the only person who is talking about this. If you do a simple Google search for any of the things I'm about to talk about, I can assure you, you will find some other YouTube videos on the things I'm going to explain here. However, I do swear, my friends, I will try to make it as entertaining as possible, and that is really the only benefit or reason that I can try to entice you into continuing to watch this video. I frequently am asked for assistance in reading or understanding a piece of social science research, and while I am more than happy to assist, Jesus guys, wow, that shit starts to compound very quickly, and I think it might be a bit more beneficial both for you and for me in the long term, both from a practical and logical sense, to instead put out this series of videos explaining most of the things that you would find in a social science publication. Also to do a kind of like, fuck the police, but instead of the police, it's fuck the ivory tower sort of thing. Yeah, this is gonna be essentially Introduction to Statistics 101, you get this course for free. If I could hand out a course credit for it, oh, of course I would, but haha, get it? I can't. However, if you just want to learn some shit, that's what I'm here for. The problem, though, is for most people, when they go into reading a piece of social science research, some of the numbers, some of the terms, some of the jargon have meanings which are obfuscated or non-obvious to the layperson. As such, yep, that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm going to try to explain social science and basic statistics. Also, while I know, as I just said, you can find just about anything I'm going to talk about here in much more depth or in much more clinical terminology through a simple search on the old tubes, I swear I will aim to be as funny as possible while I describe what is probably undeniably a very old topic, albeit one that I love, and that is statistics as they pertain to social science. For this video series, I will be essentially teaching or talking out of Joanne Keyton's book, Communication Research. I will also be using as a secondary resource Andy Field's Discovering Statistics Using SPSS. However, we will not be going over how to actually conduct research. That's pointless for the purpose of this video. No porpoises. But for the purpose of this video, I will not be discussing SPSS or how to actually go in and do social science research. That's just pointless. This video in particular is going to be a little bit different than some of the others in this series. It'll probably also be the longest because I have kind of the most to get through here. While the goal of this video series is to explain the most basic concepts you may find reported in a social science research piece, I feel I need to preface the overall series, such as it is, rather than with more in-depth explanations of actual numerical values, by explaining a bit of the basics of what is social science, but particularly my field, which certainly has a somewhat warranted reputation for being filled with more bullshit than the running of the bulls. Yeah, I want to try to explain a little bit about social science first, and I actually think that is very important. We'll get into that more, but before I can explain what a number means, what's a Cronbach's alpha, for example, I think we need to just start with what is science? What is scientific inquiry, specifically as it pertains to the social sciences? First, let me state definitively, as I have before, the standpoint from which I look at social science is one of quantitative empirical postpositivism. That means simply measurable, observable, and falsifiable in research. Research in the quantitative and empirical areas of social science inquiry are associated with questions of fact, objectivity, and based on observable aspects of nature. Essentially, as a quantitative empirical social scientist, we look at the world as a great big pizza pie, and we're just trying to, one tiny little fraction at a time, get to understand a slice of the pizza, to understand the whole. That's really the best way I can describe quantitative postpositivism, but we will get more into it. And certainly, let me be clear, there are people who consider themselves social scientists and who are considered by the field at large to be social scientists, who, for example, think that reality is subjective. Jesus Christ, someone sent me this on Twitter yesterday, which I might have to make a whole fucking video about because, oh my fucking god, how is this real? How is this real? But that is not the approach we will be taking, friends, nor is it one that I think most people would even require a primer to understand in terms of, really getting into the nitty-gritty of this type of research, given that people who think like, this person deny and reject the numerical quantification of data. Well, yeah, if you have no statistical outputs, if you have no data, then there's nothing really that a reader may not be familiar with in terms of understanding your research. As such, what I will be covering is social science research as it pertains to quantitative, maybe some qualitative stuff as well, but mostly quantitative data and research. Anyway, to start us out, let's look at the basis of scientific reasoning. That is the whole purpose of conducting research, right? I mean, if I ask you, what is the purpose of research? You might say, to answer questions. And you'd be correct. That's it. That is the most basic definition of why we do research. To answer questions. But let's get a little bit more in detail than that, shall we? Generally, in the social sciences, the questions we ask are related to determining the causes of behavior, and ideally, these questions seek to be able to predict behaviors based on our understanding of the internal machinations inside of the human psyche that lead to said action. We can encapsulate these causal and predictive findings in what is called a theory. Theory gets thrown around all the time. That's what a theory is, essentially. It's a predictive. There are 12 characteristics of the empirical social sciences, be they more quantitative, that is counting, or more qualitative, that is investigatory, that are important for everyone to understand when they look at a piece of published research, and they are as follows. 1. Research is evidence-based. While you can talk all you want about your lived feminist experiences and relativity, talk about that all day long in your little feminist journals, that shit has no place in serious scientific inquiry. Science requires data. 2. Research is testable. Similarly to the above, if you make a claim, like let's say there's this nebulous invisible force called the patriarchy that affects everything, but you can't measure it because science is part of the patriarchy, and that's why reality never really matches up to your insistence that such a thing exists, then not only are you probably clinically retarded, but also, again, you're not dealing in science. If we cannot measure a thing, it's not something we can study. I mean, for fuck's sake, Ghost Hunters at least attempts to measure their bullshit, yet see how convenient critical cultural theory is to exclude the necessity of testing and measuring, therefore permanently precluding any critical cultural theory from ever being labeled with the horrible patriarchal title of being scientific. Yeah, I mean, yippee for them, I suppose. It means that your research is always bullshit. You can't test it, you can't prove anything. And by the way, that word prove, get that out of your lexicon immediately. Social scientists can never prove anything. We can only make good arguments based on data. We can never prove anything. Trust me, as a scientist, it fucking blows. But them's the breaks. 3. Research must explore all possibilities. That means not just the convenient ones. Shitty research will jump to shitty conclusions, but again, it's all shitty. It's a giant fucking toilet. Good research attempts to explain variance and error. That is to locate the truth even if it doesn't fit in line with what you expected. You will find in garbage critical cultural, God, I hate and I hesitate to even use the term, scholarship, that typically the author will go in seeking to prove a point they believe already exists, rather than asking a question and allowing the data to answer that question. You are going into this expecting to find a result, and then guess what? Your inherent biases, as we all have, as I have always said, check your biases and understand we all have them. Your inherent biases will affect your ability to critically examine the research. This is why when you look at good research, you will often see the scientists throw in what may seem to be unrelated or less related variables to measure covariate with the variable being analyzed in the hypothesis, to examine the possibility for an alternative answer which was not initially posited. That is, when you look at, for example, a regression, and I will eventually explain what a regression is, you're looking at model fit. How well does this model, how well does this equation explain the thing I'm trying to look at? Well, if I throw in this additional variable, hey look, it helps create a more succinct model fit. That means that something about that variable, yeah, is affecting the total model, helping to explain more and more variance. For that reason, yes, a good scientist assesses many other variables other than the ones that they are looking at, and that's something to be aware of as you go into examining social science research. Are they only looking at and only assessing the variables that are laid out in the hypothesis, or are they including other variables that may have an effect on the outcome? Thing to keep in mind. 4. Research is repeatable. This is a simple one. If I did a study once and I found result X, another person should be able to do that exact same study with my same criteria that I have provided for in my published research and find the same or similar results as X. If you can't replicate a study, the data are considerably less valuable as predictive or valid. And that leads us into 5, that research must be public, if for no reason other than for replication, as I mentioned in 4. Basically, in order to ensure that point I just made, that happens, that scientists are able to replicate your research, other scientists or even lay people must be able to access the information to confirm or deny its accuracy. 6. Research as public is self-correcting. This is where post-positivism, that is, falsification, enters the mix. Remember the good old days when supposedly credible news outlets would release retractions and apologies when they published pure fucking horse shit? Well, that's essentially how research is supposed to work. If new data contradict the old, then the record need be updated. Science is constantly in motion. It is a constantly and perpetually turning wheel, upon which bad data are beaten and new data take their place as they are more correct or accurate. 7. Research relies on observation and measurement. Again, you need to be able to see and record your findings. Otherwise, you might as well be writing in your diary about how manspreading is keeping you out of STEM fields or some other totally pointless, meaningless bullshit. 8. Research recognizes error. That is, no one is perfect. Even the most stringent and controlled for environments has a possibility for accident to occur, in anything from instrumentation to measurement to even researcher bias. As always, it is why I emphasize the importance of acknowledging our own biases when we go into research. And speaking of that, number 9, research requires a minimalization of bias on the part of the researcher. To combat this, there are a number of things we can do as social scientists, from ensuring random assignment to conditions, to even utilizing graduate assistants to help distance the researcher from the participants, all of which will run through more bias filters given the double-blind nature of social science publications. That is, that no one involved in the publication process knows the other's identity to avoid preferential treatment. Now, I must give a caveat there in that, well, if you are reading someone's research very frequently and you are in a very specific field, yeah, you do kind of tend to notice somebody's writing style and you know who wrote it. They're not totally anonymous. As such, we must be constantly skeptical, about our own biases. Yes, skepticism, that word. And that leads me to the next point. This is straight out of Joanne Keyton, by the way, you guys. Research requires skepticism at its most basic level. Simply put, those who go into social science with a narrative to prove are not going to be skeptical of their work and will produce shitty research as a result, which hopefully won't be picked up by any reputable journals, but, you know, maybe by some shit. Because here's the thing, you guys. If I pay enough money, yeah, I can definitely have my garbage fucking research. Well, my research isn't garbage, but if I was producing garbage research, I could have it published in a really terrible journal. I would just have to pay them a large amount of money. And a lot of these feminists, when you see these terrible articles, be very aware. We'll get into that. That'll be a whole fucking video of what journals to look at and what to avoid. These pay-to-play journals will publish fucking anything. Be aware when you see something published in a pay-to-play journal, that is not real research. That's bullshit meant to fuck with you. Just ignore it. Research, my friends, is one area where skepticism is not a meme. You really must be entirely open-minded, as frequently the data that you find in your research will not reflect your anticipations of those data. 11. Research should be generalizable, in that it should be able to extend beyond a single individual study. While there are benefits to doing case studies, many actually, in providing a jumping off point for further research, a case study of course is a study of a unique individual or instance, ultimately social science should seek to answer questions within a theoretical framework that can apply to many instances within a set of boundary limits. That is, any theory that we come up with in social science. This is not physics, guys. There is no universal social science theory. Every social science theory needs a boundary limit. That's one of the major key pieces of being a social science theory, is having a boundary limit. We will get into stuff like that again in the future and in future videos. No single theory can explain human behavior. We're just too fucking weird. So boundary limits are required. And that means even though you do seek to have a generalizable theory, you're never going to explain all of human behavior with a single fucking theory. And in fact, the theories that attempt to kind of get at that sort of thing, such as systems theory or uses and gratifications, I hate those theories. They're not very good. And finally though, number 12. Research is heuristic, meaning answering one question should always lead to a new question. When you read any research article, at the end you will find what we call a discussion section that typically raises new questions or for further attention to be paid either from the authors or to other scientists. As I said earlier, science is this never-ending spoke against which false information is tested. It is a perpetual machine in constant progress. So now that we understand the characteristics of research, let's talk about reasoning and how we come to start asking research-worthy questions from inductive to deductive. Inductive reasoning is based on observation, leading to empirical, that is, observable generalizations about reality, followed by the formation of a theory based on the generalizations and a testing of a hypothesis based on the foundations of that theory. Deductive reasoning starts from the standpoint of a theory, after inductive work has already been completed, to ask new questions. What makes this wheel, what makes this spoke, is that new observations always can change our ongoing understanding of a thing, of a concept, causing scientists to move through the wheel time and time again, which is where post-positivism comes into the picture. The aspect of falsifiability, being able to change our perceptions of reality as new information becomes available. Now, if you don't understand what the term post-positivism means, maybe I should at first explain positivism. Positivism would be, I examine a lake and I see all of these white swans. I take a note of all of the characteristics of the swans and I can definitively describe them. Then one day I come to the lake and I see a swan that is lacking a characteristic that I have described over and over and over as being intrinsic to swans. That is, rather than having a white plumage, fucking racist, it has a black plumage. Positivists would say this is a subspecies. This somehow does not fit the category of swan. Rather than falsifying their previous attempts and their previous descriptions of the swan, they would say this is somehow different. This is where post-positivism differs. Post-positivist scholars would say, okay, now I have found a differentiation that I can include in my definition of what is a swan. Sometimes they have black plumage. That's all it is. That's all post-positivism is. Pretty simple, right? So, with inductive and deductive reasoning established, we have this ongoing permanent wheel of scientific investigation. But what exactly is the point of all this bullshit we do? Were I to be totally frank, I would admit, well, not much. But social science does have real uses and real-world applications, probably far more than most are aware. That doesn't mean the research is always valuable outside of academic applications, nor does it mean that our applications of research that do appear to be externally useful is always very effective. Take a look at, I don't know, kind of like any social advertising campaign or anti-smoking. You'll see what I mean.
This is your brain. And this is heroin. This is what happens to your brain after snorting heroin. And this is what your body goes through. Wait, it's not over yet. This is what your family goes through. Your friends and mine. And your job and your self-respect and future. Any questions?
But for what we're discussing right now, I want to get into the types of answers that social science seeks. What we are looking for when we conduct this bullshit research, as bullshit as you may believe it to be. Typically, there are 4 types of answers we seek. Descriptive analysis of a phenomenon. That is, we just want to detail what we are witnessing for some reason. Explanations of a phenomena. That is, a theory to explain why this thing is occurring. Predictions related to a phenomenon, which are often measured with regression analysis, in which case we seek to develop a model that would describe the set of criteria needed to anticipate the occurrence of said phenomena. And finally, and most difficultly, to explain why a phenomena occurs. The rarest and most elusive of answers in social science inquiry. Why? Why is a much more confusing and confounding answer to come to definitively than how or when. Why is really the hardest question we can ask. So, now that we know the types of answers that social science seeks, how exactly do we come to those types of answers? Well, there are 4 major methodologies used by social scientists to come to conclusions. The first and most involved is experimental design. Trust me, friends, we're going to go over experimental design in an entire video in and of itself. I will cover that in much depth as it deserves considerable attention. Yes, experimental design is a coy lass that must be handled with delicacy and care, but if you treat her with much time and consideration, she will reward you with the best scientific rewards your art could desire. Anyway, by that I mean experiments take a lot of work to set up, far more than any other type of methodology. Again, it's something I will get far more into at another time. Experiments require a temporal difference in measurement between time 1 and time 2 at a minimum. They require significant levels of control, which improve their ability to be internally consistent, while simultaneously often reducing the applicability of the findings to the world at large. But all of the things to understand about an experiment at this point, you should concern yourself with this. This is the thing about experiments you should consider. Experiments are the only type of research methodology that allow for definitive causal claims. Understand, causation. That means that if you're reading research and the study is not an experimental design, you cannot draw causal influence from that research. This is also a good thing to understand to arm yourself against fuckboys who will want to use research they themselves have often not read to make claims of causation. Check first the methodology. If it's not an experiment, nothing about it can be used to indicate causal links between variables. You can make a good case, but you cannot prove causation without an experiment. There is also a category called quasi-experiments as well, but again, this is why experiments are going to get their own video. Let's move on. Just understand, if it's not an experiment, it's not causal. So, next we have the most common methodology seen in social science, that is survey research. As with all research, randomization of participants for a representative sample is important. That's another topic I guess I'm gonna have to cover in detail at a later date, but essentially, surveys are cheap and easy because you can hand them out, rake in the data, and run whatever type of correlational level data you want between the variables. You can run regressions, that is, you can run predictive modeling using survey data. Ugh, again, fuck me, guys. I have to get into all of this shit another time. I'm not good at this at all. Jesus Christ, I am a terrible teacher, aren't I? But hey, it's why I said this is a series, friends. We'll get into all of this. Generally though, with survey data, you are looking at correlational data. And do you know what correlation is not? Why, it's not fucking causation. See above if you ever notice someone using survey data to prove that X causes Y. No, 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 no. Not with that shitty correlation, it doesn't. Look, this is kind of the most commonly used example that we have, but guys, there is a correlation between violence and ice cream sales. That's weird, right? There's something else, though. There's something called a moderator variable, and that moderator variable in this equation is heat. When it's hot, people buy more ice cream, and when it's hot, people commit more crime because it's fucking hot and they're pissed off. I'm pissed off right now because it's fucking hot. God damn it. Surveys also suffer from problems with validity of their instrumentation. That is, sometimes researchers just don't come up with the best battery of questions to really measure what they think they're measuring. For example, this instrument, which is designed to determine how much a person feels they're really truly inside a narrative story, inside the plot of a TV show or movie or a book, is often criticized because it really just seems to assess how much a person likes a piece of media, which has nothing to do with how much you feel you are inside of it. I mean, for fuck's sake, look at how many people love Game of Thrones. Do you think most of them are truly enjoying it while being completely immersed? Truly enjoying while they see their favorite character die? No! Game of Thrones is suffering! And goddamn, I'm about to start suffering again. Anyway, the last two types I'll gloss over a bit more quickly, starting with field observation. While going into the jungle that is human society to observe behavior was common during the inception of social psychology as a field, today, it's pretty rare. There certainly are times where it was logical, and oh, how I, as someone who came to love the field of social science because I am the perpetual social outcast, loves to just watch others. Yes, I would adore to be a fly on the wall at someplace like VidCon just to, watch people, see what they do.
Honey, this is just a computer. Watch, you're too frightened or tired to move. Well, just stand there, and I'll send Deputy Dan to get you.
That's right, Deputy Dan will find
I'll
us.
wait
It'll
here
be okay.
and kinda watch you till Dan comes.
Let's go back into the wall. This is stupid.
No, that's not very typical, but that is called field research. Just hopefully don't allow yourself to go full grizzly man and be mauled to death by bears. Finally, the last method utilized is extant data analysis or meta-analysis. That is, well, I've already collected a lot of data from some of these previously mentioned methods and like to look at them in addition to some other old data. Meta-analyses are a great way to get a gist of what much of the scientific community concludes in terms of trends on a topic. But as always, be careful. As with all research, read carefully and look for flaws or errors in the way that the information is handled. What research is included in the meta-analysis? And what's excluded? I know that's difficult and that's really outside of the scope of the lay person in reading this research, but I can only offer that up as a sort of suggestion, right? I hope that as I do make this a real series, maybe by the end, all of you guys will be able to do just that, though. You'll be able to really look at a piece of research and say, this is bullshit, and here's why. Okay, so now that we know how this research is conducted and what kinds of answers research seeks, let's move backwards a little bit to look at what the questions are like. In order to understand the questions, those are the hypotheses being posed by scientific research, you need to identify the independent and dependent variables. The independent variable, the IV, is the predictor variable, while the dependent, that is the DV, is the outcome variable. When a researcher states their hypothesis predicts X will lead to Y, X is the IV and Y is the DV. Let's take everyone's favorite pet topic as an example, violence and media. Let's say I want to conduct an experimental study on video games and violence, for example, because such a thing has totally never been done. I give one of my groups of subjects a violent video game to play. Let's say Minecraft.
Do you have that game, Minecraft? Penny was telling me she was playing it on her computer book. Let's play Minecraft.
The other group, I have watched a marathon of feminist frequency videos. A totally neutral piece of media. Afterwards, I survey them asking about their level of agitation. Obviously, the people who played the evil, I'm guessing it's racist and definitely sexist game made by a literal double Hitler, will report far more agitation. Am I right? No, I'm wrong, because that's complete bullshit. My point is, in that ridiculous and completely invalid proposed study, is that what are the IV and what are the DVs? The IV is the media introduced, be it a normie video game or an intolerable series of videos, while the DV is self-assessment of irritation or anger. Understand? In an experimental design, we may call the IV an explanatory variable, given that we can more easily place it into a predictive model. But in survey-level research, the IV and the DV are ways to conceptualize of these ideas that may be related to each other. Again, survey data, not predictive, not causal. Finally, as a last aside on the basis of research, I need to discuss levels of measure. The levels of measure in data are as such: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Nominal, as the name implies, is about naming the categories that are exclusive and exhaustive. There is no hierarchical order to them, as in a subject can only be male or female, sorry Tumblr, which are distinct and discriminate while holding no measurable difference. And by the way, yeah, again, Tumblr, Riley Dennis, who the fuck ever, even if we did live in a Fantasyland where there were 9,000 genders, gender would always be a nominal piece of data. It's a category. Next is ordinal, which is typically used for categories that do have order to them, but that order is not equal or equivalent between groups. Typically, you would see this in questions on a Likert-type instrument regarding income or age range, as in, for example, how much does your family earn? 0 to 25,000, 25 to 50,000, 50,000 to 100,000, or 100,000 and above. You see that last question? 100,000 and above. That includes all numbers, of course, above 100,000, and as such is unending. It has no upper limit, and as a virtue of that, is not equivalent to the other categories in terms of distal equivalence. That's ordinal level data. Interval level data, on the other hand, is the same as ordinal, except that the distances between groups are equivalent and exhaustive. So instead of 0 to 25, 25 to 50, etc., it would have to be every single level by the exact same distance between those levels of measurement. So for example, if I'm asking about age range in orders of 10 years, I would have to use interval level data, and I'd have to include all possible ages in groups of 10. But of course, I can't ask people not yet born if their age is 0. I would have to ask, is your age 0? And that would not be included. That would be impossible. This is where the final level of measure comes in. That's ratio level data. Data that include a logical 0 point. If I wanted to conduct research on how much dank ganja you, weed Lamau, toked up in the last 6 months, I would have to include 0 as a number in that research. Otherwise, my data would not properly account for people who aren't members of the Libertarian Party. Oh, I love mocking myself. Whenever you organize information like this, there's this weird tendency for us as humans to prioritize some as better or worse, but that's not really the case in terms of levels of measurement. The levels build on one another, and higher levels can be analyzed in more depth, but there are absolute total reasons why we use nominal data, for example. Why nominal data need be assessed and collected, such as with gender, as I mentioned. So, now that you guys have all the basics down, let's synergize everything we just talked about by looking at the model of quantitative research. You start out with 2 basic premises, both your empirical observations, that is the things you can see and observe, and your understanding of the extant literature, as should be bolstered by further examination into the observation or the predictive model, or the prediction made. Once you have assessed in culmination, you form a research question or a hypothesis. Now, there is a difference between a research question and a hypothesis, and it's simple. And keep this in mind when you're reading research if the researchers are posing RQs, research questions, or H's, hypotheses. Research questions are open-ended and non-directional. They are merely questions. Hypotheses, on the other hand, are directed and can be disproven by accepting the null hypothesis, that is, the opposite of the hypothesis. Such as, if I hypothesize that feminism is fucking retarded, and through quantitative measures I find some example of feminism not being retarded, I would have to accept the null that my hypothesis is incorrect, and feminism is in fact not fucking retarded. However, if I find no evidence that feminism is not fucking retarded, I can reject the null and assert that my original hypothesis is correct. Feminism is fucking retarded. You can have a non-directional hypothesis as well, that is, I predict X will affect Y, but I can't determine in what direction the effect will produce an outcome. But that's again for another time. Anyway, once we have our hypotheses or our Qs, we utilize one of the methodologies we have just learned about to conduct an experiment, which is affected by the reliability of our instrument and the validity of our methods, or a survey, or something else. We conduct one of our methodologies to work forward towards answering our hypothesis or our research question. Once we've posed our hypothesis or our research question and we've assessed and collected the data, then we can answer our RQ, or we can accept or reject our null. And yep, them's the basics of social science research. Really all science research. Really guys, seriously tell me if you enjoyed this video and want me to continue to produce this series. I find this very enjoyable to talk about, and I hope I can make it enjoyable for you as well. If you all liked this, I will continue to try to regularly upload content about understanding statistics and social science. I think I'll take us all the way up to about ANOVAs, analysis of variance, and regressions as an ultimate goal. And if you guys don't know what an ANOVA or an analysis of variance or a regression model is, you know what? Good for you, because if you like this, I will eventually make sure you understand what it is. I really hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it wasn't too boring. Tell me if you have some way to spruce it up to make it a little bit more entertaining. If you enjoyed this video though, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, Altana Volt.